285 and 40. Well, just beyond the B column, you're in the 40-pound region. And from there, if you reach out to A7 from that location, you're down around 11 pounds per square inch, and the A7 was a very, very massive and heavy column. There's absolutely no way. Now, you could have brought it down from there. But I say this, the maximum reach of the bomb would have been into B3 because that's where the column came down.
Mm-hmm.
But the truck bomb was not in front of column A3. It was over beyond column A4. And column B4 and B5 in the middle row would have seen a lot more impulse than the column B3, which came down. In fact, it would be about twice as much impulse as column B3. And so if you were going to bring down a column, it would have been B3 or B4 or B5, and certainly not B3. You don't have to go any further than that to know that you had a demolition charge on column B3. Now, if you look at those columns, they have furring strip on them, and they have sheetrock on them. Mm-hmm. And the sheetrock and furring strips are still on them. Down at the first and second floor, some of the sheetrock and furring strips have been knocked off, but you see absolutely no spalling damage to those columns. So columns a lot closer than B3 to the truck bomb, still have sheetrock and furring strips around them that weren't even knocked off. Now, you can't think about bringing down a column by blast without cleaning that sort of stuff off if you had the power to collapse that kind of size of a column.
So
you don't need to go any further than that to know that B3 had a demolition charge. There's no other explanation. It's a closed set.
General, you're telling me that somebody drilled those columns and then placed explosives on the columns?
Well, they don't need to have drilled it. They could just have taped the satchel charge up against that column and have brought it down.
But, General, we had a bomb outside. We had a demolition crew inside. How many personnel do you think were involved in this operation?
Well, it would have taken several, and it would have taken people with access. Now, you got to remember that those federal buildings have guards on the gate, and they have magnetometers and everything else. So it's not only a matter of how many people, but who had access. That's the problem.
General, is there anything we haven't discussed or have overlooked here?
I wanted to point out, I say there were 4 demolition charges inside the building.
Okay.
And I pointed out that there was one at the junction of the header with the column A7. There was also one at the junction of column A3 and A5 and at B3. Now, for the television audience, I have a chart that shows uncovered the evidence. Right here, you can see the area has been cleaned out around column B3, and it was destroyed by demolition charge, appears to be a charge destroyed by demolition charge, at the 3rd floor level. You can see the rebar sticking up above what remains of the concrete column. There's no other extensive damage around on the column. It's just where the detonation wave pressure ran out, and the granular destruction of that column petered out, but you still have the rebar still sticking up. Now, at the header, that's been uncovered, it went across, that's about a 3-foot by 5-foot, or a little less than that, beam. And you can see column A3 standing up. There is no spallation on it. You can see the rebar sticking out of the top. You can see the Art Deco rings around the column. And that was the demolition charge at A3, peeled out the concrete from the rebar down just a little below that header. And you can see on the right side, the header to the right, you can see where the rebar is completely exposed and the concrete is outside of the zone from in around that rebar.
General Pardon, can you give us your conclusion to these matters?
My conclusion is that there had to have been those 3 demolition charges in the building at A3, A5, and A7,
okay,
and at column B3.
Okay.
Now, when I wrote the letter to the House, I said it was perfectly possible for that to have been done because those columns were available to people from the street. And I expected when I looked at it, if it had been some outside job, the demolition charges would have been at the base of B3, B5, and B7. but they weren't. They were up at the third floor level, which says those charges were on the third floor. And you look at the end of the column there, look at the end of the beam over at column A7, and you can see at the top of that column you had more destruction than you did at the bottom. In other words, the demolition charge was on top of the column at that juncture, inside of the building and not outside of the building.
Why were they in such a hurry to bring the building down?
Well, I can say that we don't know who did the damage down there, but I know who's covering it up. They not only brought the building down, they cleared out the site, they covered the site with dirt, they carted the 200 tons of building over to a site, and I was under the impression it was a raid out for further possible inspection, but we went over to that site, and there were guards at the gates. You were not permitted to enter, and we were told by the people at the site that all the material was buried. They dug holes and buried it.
So the conclusions of your investigation is that there's another classic cover-up going on.
Obviously. It's a classic cover-up. A classic cover-up.
So if you weren't under that desk, you wouldn't have made it?
Well, my floor was okay, and the ceiling had come down, but there was still concrete above, so it was just a corner of the office that was left that we were in. Everybody else that we worked with was gone.
Are you okay? Just the corner of your office was okay? And the rest of the floor was completely flattened?
And we go over the edge and look, and you can see the sky and as far down as you can look, and just a hole.
And which floor were you on?
Fifth.
On fifth?
Fifth floor.
Please listen very closely to this momentous account given when events were still vivid in the mind of this survivor. Note that the building was already going down before any bomb outside had been detonated. Indeed, a street bomb would first blow in the Murrah building's window glass, but this survivor's account has the building quaking several seconds before the glass was blown in.
So just the one corner of the fifth floor wasn't completely flattened?
From the east, I don't know what the west end of the building looks like.
Did everybody just crawled out of the desk after?
To the ambulance.
It was like slow motion. We crawled under before the glass started coming, and everything, it just seemed to roll in on us. I thought it was an earthquake when it started. It was just a kind of a shake, and then everything started going like this, and I dove under the desk, and then all the glass came in and the ceilings came down, and I probably got cut worse if I hadn't been under the desk. I just got little scrapes and scratches. I was really lucky.
Really lucky.
Didn't we just hear this survivor indicate the building was quaking several seconds before the window glass blew in? Therefore, before any street bomb detonated? That part merits another look.
It was like slow motion. We crawled under before the glass started coming, and everything, it just seemed to roll in on us. I thought it was an earthquake when it started. It was just a kind of a shake, and then everything started going like this, and I dove under the desk, and then all the glass came in and the...
Let's put some of the pieces together. This survivor's account is in full accord with information on the news clips and General Parton's analysis. First, the bombs on the support columns at the building's lower levels were detonated, severing the columns and projecting debris across the street. Several seconds later, a street bomb detonated, blowing in the fifth floor's windows. The March 31st, 1997 issue of the New American Magazine quotes other top technical experts, making statements similar to those of General Parton. While referencing the test demolition of an Eglin Air Base structure, which was similar to the Murrah building, Mike Smith, a civil engineer in Cartersville, Georgia, said, "The results of the blast effect test 1 on the Eglin test structure present strong evidence that a single ammonium nitrate and fuel oil device of approximately 4,800 pounds placed inside a truck could not have caused the damage at the Murrah Federal Building experienced on April 19, 1995. Even assuming that the building had structural deficiencies and that the ANFO device was constructed with racing fuel, the air-coupled blast produced from this 48 1,200-pound device could not have damaged the columns and beams of the Murrah building enough to produce a catastrophic failure. Robert Frias, president of Frias Engineering of Arlington, Texas, after examining the test demolition, concluded the Murrah building would still be standing and the upper floors would be intact had the truck loaded with explosives been the only culprit. Moreover, Frias, a practicing engineer with over 40 years and a registered engineer in Texas, New Mexico, and Louisiana, stated explosives had to be placed near or on the structural columns inside the building to cause the collapse that occurred to the Murrah building. Likewise, Alvin Norberg, a licensed professional engineer in Auburn, California, with over 50 years of engineering experience on over 5,000 construction projects, writes that evidence from this data verifies that the severe structural damage to the Murrah building was not caused by a truck bomb outside the building, and that the collapse of the Murrah Federal Building was a result of mechanically coupled devices, bombs, placed locally within the structure adjacent to the critical columns. Kenneth Gow of Whittier, California, with over a half-century of engineering experience in the aerospace industry, writes in his evaluation, the Eglin Test Structure Report further reinforces the conclusion that a substantial portion of the Murrah building damage was by internal explosions. And indeed, if the omission of these authoritative accounts of General Parton and other technical experts casts doubt upon the credibility of our dominant media, how should we respond to an outright lie in that context? In the issues in May 1st, 1995 issues of both Time and Newsweek, these weekly news magazines showed artists' rendering of a huge crater in front of the Murrah building, a crater produced by the alleged exploding Ryder truck. Both Time and Newsweek stated that the resulting crater was 30 feet wide and 8 feet deep. That's a crater big enough to swallow up a Winnebago or a medium-sized school bus. Now, why did Time and Newsweek just present the artist's rendering and not an actual photo of that huge crater? We know why. Because we have early video footage taken just after the bombing. Time and Newsweek did not present a photo of the huge crater because the huge crater is a lie, a hoax, an obstruction of justice. Indeed, a crime against the American people. Where is that huge crater? Our raw footage clearly showed people walking here within the so-called huge crater area. Either those people are over 12 feet tall or that huge crater is a hoax. Wouldn't such a crater be very conspicuous? Well, where is it? We believe the huge crater hoax is just one glaring part of the bigger hoax created by our media and our government in order to cover up the truth that the Murrah building was blown up from within by people who had free access to federal buildings. Further confirmation of the government media fabrication of a vast crater may be found in Michelle Marie Moore's detailed account of the Murrah building bombing, titled Oklahoma City, Day 1. On page 61, Moore discloses that the plywood that workers placed in front of the building, supposedly to cover the huge crater, concealed instead merely some scattered debris. It appears that a tiny, suspiciously shaped crater, too small for detection by aerial video, might have existed, but this tiny crater was too small to plausibly suggest an explosion outside the Murrah building large enough to have been the sole cause of such massive damage. Accordingly, the huge 30-foot wide by 8-foot deep hoax crater was invented to hide the fact that the critical bombs were strategically placed inside the building by people who were protected from above and who had free access inside the Murrah building. Eyewitness reports and expert testimony have firmly established that the multiple bombs that were placed inside the building contained explosive charges sufficiently